In this video, we're going to talk about something called simple interest. If you put your money into a bank account, your savings account will pay you what's called interest, which is extra money that will be added to your account just for depositing money into a particular bank. Uh, by the same token, if you borrow money, you're also going to pay interest on that borrowed money, which means that if you were borrowing, for example, $200 and you're paying back that loan, you're not actually going to pay back $200, but you're going to pay back $200 plus interest. And the components, whenever you start talking about interest, the main components are something called principal, rate, and time. And from these three ideas, you can calculate what the interest is, and you can also calculate your new amount in the account if you're talking about a bank account. So really, one of the most important parts to understand would be this rate. And whenever you talk about interest rates, typically what you'll hear is APR. And when you talk about an APR, you're talking about an annual percentage rate. So let's write that down here. So APR stands for annual percentage rate. So annual, of course, meaning for every year. So for example, if you had an APR or an annual percentage rate of 5%, you're basically saying that your interest is going to be 5 for every 100. So 5% literally means 5 for every 100. And in decimal form, if you're doing 5 for every 100, you're looking at 5 hundredths or 0.05. Now, since it's annually, that's saying 5 for every 100 for every year. So just as an easy example, if you had a principal of $100 and you were looking at 1 year, if the interest rate or the APR is 5%, you're going to have 5 for every 100 for every year. So your interest would just be $5. And the new amount in your account would be the 100 that you started with plus the $5 in interest, and you would be at $105. Let's change the principal. Let's say instead of having $100, let's talk about $200, and let's keep this the same. Let's keep this at 5%, and let's keep this the same. So now, what would your interest be? Well, if you're getting 5 for every 100, and now there's $200, so 5 for the first 100, 5 for the second 100, now you're up to an interest of $10. Okay. And once again, you can think of 5% as 5 for every 100, and the new amount in your account would be $110. All right, let's do a new amount here. Let's do $500 for the principal, and let's stick with this 5%. And 1 year still. So if you're getting 5 for every 100, so 5 for the first 100, 5 for the second 100, 5 for the third 100, fourth 100, fifth 100, so that would be 5 fives in total, or $25. Now, does anyone see what you can do with these two numbers to get this number? So what would I do? So if I take 100 in this 500ths, or if I take 200 in this 500ths, or 500 in this 500ths, what operation can I perform between those two numbers to get this number? And the answer is you would multiply. If you take 100 times 500ths, these hundreds would cancel out, and you just be left with 5. If I take 200 times 500ths, think of this 200 as 200 over 1. You can cross reduce. The 200 and the 100 would become a 2 and a 1. And then if you multiply 2 times 5, you get 10. 500 times 500ths, once again, if you're multiplying these two numbers, you can cross reduce. This would become a 5, this would become a 1, and 5 times 5 would be 25. So hopefully you can take away from this that it really kind of looks like between your principal and your rate, if you multiply these values, you get this value. Now let me take this first example with the $100 and the 5%. And instead of looking at it in terms of 1 year, what if I looked at it in terms of 2 years? Well, since this is my annual percentage rate, since I'm getting 5 for every 100 for every year, so I would get 5 for the first year and then 5 for the second year. Once again, I'm going to have $10 in interest. And looks like I didn't write down my new amount in my account, which would be 125. And this number here would be $110. All right, what if I did 3 years? So let's start with $100 and let's do 5%, so 5 for every year. And we'll do 3 years here. So if I get, 5 for every 100 for every year, so 5 for the first year, 5 for the second year, 5 for the third year, that's a total of $15 in interest. So the new amount in my account would be $115. So let's look at, what could you do between these numbers here to get this number? Well, with the 5%, if you just looked at this 5, for example, 5 times 2 gives you the 10, 5 times 3 would give you the 15. So it kind of looks like there's a multiplication thing happening here, but then remember that 5% is really 5/100ths. And if you're doing 5/100ths times 2, that's actually 10/100ths. So where is this 100 going? Well, when you multiply by this 100 here, these would cancel out. So the big idea that I want you to take away from this is that when you're calculating interest, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up taking your principal times your rate times your time. Let's go through one more example. So let's say you had a principal of $300 and let's change the rate. Let's say it was 4%. Let me rewrite that 4 here real quick. So I have 4%, which is the same as 4/100ths, or 0.04. And let's make my time, I don't know, let's do 3 years. So let's see if we can kind of think through this interest rate here. So if I'm getting 4%, or 4 for every $100, and I have $300, so 4 for the first 100, 4 for the second 100, 4 for the last 100, that's going to be $12 in interest so far, just considering these two parts. But then I have that it's happening over the course of 3 years. So that $12 that I got was just for the first year. So I would get another $12 for the second year, another $12 for the last year. So in total, I would have $36 in interest, and my new amount in my account would just be $336. Now look what happens if you just multiply these numbers together. And let's pull out the calculator so we can kind of see this happening. So if I had 300 and I was at 4% interest, so I'm going to multiply by 0.04. 4% is 4/100ths, so I need to make sure I get that decimal in the right spot. So right now I'm at 12, and then that was over the course of, I believe we did 3 years, right? Yeah, so 3 for the time here. So multiply that by 3, and hopefully you see that you're really just multiplying the principal times your rate times your time to get your interest. And that is your formula that you're going to want to use here. So interest is the money paid or earned for the use of money. The principal is the amount of money borrowed or deposited. Simple interest is money paid or earned only on the principal. And your simple interest, I, is equal to your principal, P, which is just your starting amount of money. How much money did you put in your bank account? Or if you're talking in terms of lending, how much money did you borrow? Your R value is your interest rate, and whenever you use this formula, you're going to want to put it in decimal form. So if it's 7%, for example, you're going to put in 0.07. If it's 13%, you're going to put 0.13. And your time is always going to be in years. And if you just multiply this principal times this rate times this time, you will get your simple interest.